This is the 5th day of the July 88 7-day retreat. Somebody came to a meeting and said, "Has been something that has been bothering me, sort of nagging in my mind, about a contradiction in what you're saying. You keep talking about that there is no method here, no practice, no techniques. And yet you're asking people to sit quietly, not to move. Isn't that a method?" Can we look at it here together this morning? What it is about sitting quietly during a certain period of time, and if possible, not moving. The person also brought up that this is being presented almost as a rule that one has to conform to if one is to sit in this room. And yet at the same time the implication that there are no rules really about sitting and doing what one needs to do. If the way it has been presented or is being presented in opening talks or mentioned by the coordinators, if this is conveyed as a rule or a rigid rule, we have to change the way in which we're presenting it. There is movement going on. As one person pointed out, people are coming back from meetings. Here and there someone shifts the position of hands or straightens the back or bobs up and down. It would be better if we could see that as a mutual agreement, and yet leaving the possibility, if somebody needs to make a move, that this is possible, not getting the feeling I would be transgressing rules if I shifted the posture of my arm or straightened the back or pushed the knee forward. We do have the dining room, but as one person mentioned, I don't like to sit. It's not as nice as in this room. And as the mind operates, thought operates. Thought may suggest this is not quite the real thing yet. As the one person put it, there's two persons involved in having talked about this, that dining room is sort of like, makes me feel like training wheels. In there I train, and then eventually I graduate into this room. some of us have been in centers where there are rooms for beginners, where beginners cannot sit in this room right away, and it is this old pattern that we already have instilled in us of freshman, sophomore, and so forth. But this is not the meaning of the dining room, and there are people at times sitting in the dining room who have sat for over 10 years, maybe longer than that. There's also some easy chairs in there. Sometimes the person feels it's nice to get away from maybe the greater intensity with more people together in this room. One person said, it would feel better if I knew it's all right to move. I may not, but not have this feeling this is a transgression. I'm breaking a rule. And we have to be careful in the future of how this is put, that it doesn't convey itself as a rule, which is not to be broken. I don't know whether we've done this, but we may have. So I will watch it. Because one can call into question the whole thing of whether one would sit without moving. And yet, in watching for oneself, if there is at all a pausing and wondering about what is happening, pausing from our compulsive stream of actions, activities, thought movements, and wondering what really is going on, sitting down in a place which is provided for that, doesn't the whole body quite naturally come to stillness, to listen? I want to listen to that bird. I don't stir around. If I need to get in touch with some stress, or pain, turmoil, mental or physical, within, doesn't the whole organism in mind naturally slow down, pause, observe deeply, quietly, without any imposition of a rule for that? If one finds oneself in the presence of some exquisite music, exquisitely played or rendered, one doesn't move. One sits quietly to listen so as not to interfere with what is perceived. Sometimes even the breathing seems to almost stop. As one takes a walk, one notices a strange insect on a leaf, or a spider web, or a marvelous view of the sun setting, casting the orange light over the hills and forests. One stands and looks, and one doesn't go on, one stands still. Yesterday, looking out of the eastern window in the balcony, someone pointed at it, and there was this incredibly marvelous cumulus cloud just filling that window. And all the shades from gray to white to orange. There's no movement in such a looking. It does not need to be legislated. What comes to mind too is an old movie, maybe many of you have seen it, about the Eskimos. It was called Nanook of the North. The photographer followed this Eskimo and his extended family, and there were long shots of Nanook bending over a breathing hole for a seal. He had carved this out of the, as is the custom, out of the ice, because seals need to surface for breathing. And I don't remember the amount of hours, but it seemed extraordinary amount of hours, something like 17 hours. This man stood bent over the hole. Of course, every once in a while he probably had to move away. Movie didn't show that at that time. They didn't show those things. But here he was, just looking. And the family was waiting for food. Their life depended on catching a seal. There was no casual pleasure. So here he stood. He didn't move, because if he moves, the seal won't come up. So just watching. He had the feeling that for this man, at that breathing hole, time did not exist. Because the moment time comes into action through thinking, how much longer will it last till I will get something, feel better, the bell rings, then the body is perturbed and wants to move about. When there's no sense of time, the body is relaxed. Not tensing for things to come or for things to obtain, or away from things that are frightening. So is it possible to sit in a relaxed way without the sense of time, which means without the sense of I must accomplish something, must get through it, must obey the rules, but relax into sitting, relax even into whatever knots and rigidities one is bringing to this moment, because we're not relaxed the way we live, full of stress, tensions, rigidities, pressures in all kind of areas. Place people most point to is here, or the solar plexus, or the belly, the back. Not from sitting, but one brings this to the sitting. One gets pain from sitting too. I'm not exonerating that. But mostly we get pain because we're tense and rigid. rigid with thoughts about the past and the future, and me, which is the past and the future. The thoughts about it, that's me. So, how can one relax into the stress that one brings here? It sounds so paradoxical, doesn't it? It's a way of putting it, saying not to want to get over it or get rid of it, but find out about it with a softness of spirit, a gentleness of inquiry. Which is not mental. It's the quieting down of the mentation about how awful it is and what it is all about. And we've talked about it over the last 4 days. But opening up to what's there in a new way that is not known or knowable. It's just listening, opening, wondering, with no expectation of an outcome. Because then the body rigidifies. I must find out by the end of this retreat or by the end of this round. One can notice by observing tensions in the muscles or stomach or wherever they manifest, by observing them or feeling them out in a loving way, could we say? We'll just use that word, we won't. It means not harshly, not putting conditions on it, just, what is it? Like meeting a friend, a new friend. One can tell how rigidities in the body are fraught with thoughts. Not necessarily coherent stories, but I should, I shouldn't, I must, I can't, I will. And as the muscle relaxes in the presence of this attention, which is gentle, these thoughts sort of bubble out, come into awareness. One can tell that when one does exercises, maybe yoga, having this compulsion or compulsive conditioning to not just to bend over, but I must reach my toes, like the teacher does, or like most of the other people in this room are doing. It's a completely different thing from just bending over and the awareness permeating the body which is now bending, moving downward. It's a complete shift from I must reach the toes to what's happening. Let me feel it. Let it come into awareness. Then a sort of compulsive and noisy kind of a thing becomes quiet and open. And it doesn't matter how far the bend goes, it is totally irrelevant. Somebody earlier in the retreat said, it seems that everything I do, starting from getting up in the morning, or staying in bed, jogging or not jogging, eating breakfast, working, writing a paper, or not writing, sitting down or not sitting, is all compulsive. There seems to be nothing I do which is not compulsive. Can one be free from compulsiveness? Is there a way out? Something like this, the person was wondering. Is there? First of all, is one aware of the compulsiveness of all of one's movements? Compelled by habit, or fear, or motive, or goal, or performing, trying to appear well to others, afraid of not appearing well to others. Compelled by getting things done, living right, being good. Is one aware that whatever we do, there is some kind of a compulsion behind it? So rarely is there no compulsion at all. We all long for spontaneity, but the things we do, spontaneous in quotation marks, are compelled by wanting to be spontaneous. I remember the age early in life of going to parties is not the parties that I understand one goes to today, where it wasn't drugs, it was people were drinking and smoking. And all the things that were done, all the jokes that were told, all the dancing going on, all to demonstrate how spontaneous one was, but it was so sad. Or funny sometimes. To try to be done with this compulsive self-consciousness. To try to fall into some kind of oblivion. But that's not spontaneity. So what about this question about, is there any way out of compulsion? One sits down. Does one sit down compulsively? Try to get that quietness with a compelling motive to get there, to bring it about. And we've talked over 2 or 3 days about ways in which the mind can find some tranquility through repetitive practices. Concentrative, repetitive practices. Find that quiet spot away from the compulsion of the day. But finding that is still under the sponsorship of the compulsion. The compulsion away from compulsion. The me trying to get away from itself. So how will one sit down or walk or work? Relate with each other? in a non-compulsive way. Is that humanly possible? That's what we're asking here. We've been asking it. We've been looking at it. Whether some mode of being, some mode of the mind can come into being which sheds light on compulsion but is not compulsive itself, is free of that, is free of self-centeredness. Because all compulsion comes ultimately from self-centeredness with all its past ingrained habits, images, ambitions, goals and fears, anxieties. Can there be an awareness which sheds light, illumines all of that without being of it? Not ignoring what's there, not ignoring how we act and react, and strive and run away, want things and don't want things, to shed light on all of that. It's for each one of us to find out. No one can do it for anyone else. It may be that if we're talking together in a meeting room with a quiet there and the energy that's there when two people seriously meet and look at things, pausing at times, asking questions, looking. That there can be the total absence of any compulsion to come up with an answer, to behave in a certain way, to see each other through images. And can that go on away from here? When one leaves the retreat, many people are very concerned about going back home, to work, to the family, whatever one's situation is. Will there be this space and quietness to look and listen, or will one be sucked in, as one person put it? Sucked in into the daily ongoing routines in which there is so little attention, maybe none, and so much stuff brought up in each other, by each other, through each other. See, if the question comes up and the question is really deeply serious, then one will remember to look. It's not that one will remember to look, attention will come. Maybe as one is sucked in, maybe right at the moment it's starting. And it may not have to continue. One has to find this out. And one can find it out if there's serious concern. We say this again and again, but please, let's say it and hear it freshly, that it doesn't fall into sort of a groove and one doesn't listen anymore because one has heard those words. See, what we call this work, for lack of a better word, there could be a better word. If you find one or have one, please let me know. I'll interject a little bit. One person wrote to me and said, I just received your book. Was your mother a Protestant? It's called The Work of This Moment. Associated with the word work is work, work, work. Good works. This is how you have to live. Work. And then you will be, I don't remember, will you then be pleasing to God, pleasant to God? I think this is part of it. And He will reward you. So it's not the best word. I'm not stuck on it. But coming back to what we were saying, doing this, or finding out, listening, attending, quietly, unself-centeredly, to discover self-centeredness and compulsion every moment. This is not a casual affair. It may be for someone doing it today, or maybe for a year, and then dropping it again. Trying it out, it's not for me, or saying, well, it's good for my life to also do something spiritual every once in a while. It sort of completes the diet. This is not what this is, as far as I can see. It's not casual, it's one's whole life. Is this one's whole life? To live in this way? Work in this way? Looking, wondering, finding out, not running away, discovering, and in the discovery being free of whatever is discovered, anger, ambition, fear. Not once and for all, but at that moment, free, not compelled by the anger to continue, or the fear to continue with whatever one was engaged in. If it is clear that this is one's whole life, then the pressure of time drops away. One will always meet what comes up, freshly. Not worry about getting it all done today and then having a good life afterwards, whatever that means. So, in worrying, how will it be when I get home, back to work, when the retreat is over, the quiet comes to an end? Find out. And meet the situation which seems so problematical or difficult. We're free to meet anything, at any time. We have no ideas of what it is or should be or shouldn't be, but find out what it is. Sit down together, talk about it, discuss it together, if we're both so inclined or whoever is involved in a problem. Open up, put the cards down on the table, face up, and look at it. If the other person or persons don't want to share in this, then one cannot force people to do something. But can one be clear oneself in the midst of confusion? Be clear that one is confused, that's the first step. And maybe if a moment comes at night to sit down with that confusion, quietly allow the fog to fog around. just wondering simply and quite humbly what it is all about. Leaving all previous methods and tackles behind. Sometimes people mention that there isn't a room in the place where they live where they could be alone for a moment or quiet. Some people work in offices, 60 people with maybe computers, artificial lights. Where will one find that moment of quiet in the midst of all this humanity and the machines that go with it? Because if one commutes, some people commute over an hour to work and back. One may be carpooling, and in the car there's constant conversation going on. Maybe not always, maybe at one point everybody is tired of talking. And there is a moment of quiet. If there is no room for being quiet in the office or in the school, there's always the bathroom, where one can close the door and the four walls are there. And one can stop and listen for a moment. As one person wrote from New York City once, used to come to retreat, I don't know how many times a year. And then he got married, and then one child, and then two children. First one business, now two businesses, to keep the family going. He said, in walking the asphalt, how I long to be walking up the hill in Springwater, but there's no time right now. No fresh air. So then he writes, I just sit down when I come home, when I find the time, and listen to the motor idling noisily. Not the motor of the cars out there, they're there too, but this inner motor just idling noisily, and listen to that. In that there is quiet, isn't there? There's no fault finding. There's just what is, and listening to it without trying to interfere or control or compel. It's not impossible to be in that quiet spot in the midst of the traffic. It's not impossible. In the midst of relationship, turmoil, difficulties, noise. But is this one's whole life? Or is it a sideline and actually one wants to get pleasure and fame and possessions, relationship and so forth? Can one look at all of that honestly, openly, clearly? Since I mentioned the word pleasure, let me just bring up what someone asked. Person said, I read the little brochure that you put out, and in there's a quote by you which says something like this, that there can be the blossoming of love and understanding and intelligence if there is this quiet listening and one is not stuck in fear, pain, or pleasure. And the person was wondering, saying, having been brought up in a very puritanical condition, this smacks of no pleasure, don't give in to pleasure, there's danger in pleasure, about puritanical upbringing, it's pleasure is of Satan. So a person wanted to know, what do you mean by pleasure? Can one differentiate between pleasure and joy? And I'll explain what I mean by the two words. Joy or delight being the momentary joy of listening or being together, sharing something, seeing this marvelous cloud in the window, or the cardinal. Taking a swim in cool water on a hot day, or an ice cream cone. The joy of really being there without being there, not wanting to grab it, have it forever, but just what's there, the beauty of it, the richness of it. And when it's finished, it's over. Not to start hanging after it, wanting it again, clinging to the remembrance of it. Pain coming that I don't have it now, or planning how can I get it again. Being occupied in one's mind with past pleasure. With the moment thinking takes it over, memory takes it over, then it's no longer joy, then it's pleasure. That's how I use the words. Joy one doesn't get stuck in because it comes and then it's gone. One gets out of the pool, it's hot again, one has to do some work. Does not mean that does not bring joy. But if it's finished, one doesn't hang after it. It's nothing to be held on to. But the way we live is in the thought of past and future pleasures and trying to obtain them by imagining them over and over, or getting the body thrilled or excited by thinking of pleasurable things. Then one doesn't hear the cardinal. One doesn't see the people around one. One dreams about other people, or what these people should be like or could be for one. Do you see what I mean? Pleasure is entirely fabricated by thought, fantasy, and imagination. Joy is not. It can only come into being when thought is quiet. And therefore, there is the real thing in its simplicity and beauty. If the thought comes up, what's wrong with thinking of something that was pleasurable? The answer is, it's nothing wrong, but see what it does, how it operates. Is the mind free and open to perceive when it is occupied with past, present, and future thought-created pleasures? Which go hand in hand with thought-created fears not to get what one had or would like to have again, or has right now as one thinks about. So both the attachment to pleasure and the fear of losing it or not getting it go together, because both ride with thought. It's the same vehicle. Will one observe this for oneself? Not control it, but see it happening. That was very nice. We'll end here for today.